my health world, namaste, enlightenment.
Namaste everyone, welcome to My Health World. We've got a really profound discussion today with my beautiful mum, Zoe-Anne Fields.
Hello everybody, namaste.
Thanks for all the beautiful feedback for our last podcast together, which was Past Life Regression. And I don't know, Mum, I think the fact that you're just this older, wiser goddess, everyone just seems to think you're the bee's knees and the ant's pants. And I'm like, what about me? I'm joking, of course, yeah. It's so lovely and to receive so much beautiful feedback. And yes, we do have a wonderful connection as mother and daughter, and very blessed for that. We want to talk about death today. It's such an important topic because what we're seeing in the current narrative now, it's January 2021. What we're seeing in the current narrative, we may talk a little bit in code today because there's certain words we don't want to use. We don't want to get flagged on our YouTube channel and taken down. But with the C-vid, we'll call it, with the C-vid situation, the fear carrot has been dangled in front of the masses that if we don't toe the government line with the certain restrictions and certain protocols, then we may die. And also too, the heartstrings are pulled that we may cause the death for someone else. And I personally find this very, very offensive. I am so offended I can't even tell you, because I know that I'm a loving girl. I know that I don't want anyone to perish from any kind of dastardly disease. However, I also know, as a light worker and a healer for some 20 odd years, more if you include my past lives, that death is a natural part of life. And when someone's time is up, their time is up. And that needs to be celebrated. We really need to change the narrative, particularly in the Western countries, around death. Because if we're controlled by fear, then we are living in an adrenalized state where our cortisol levels are high. We are creating stress within ourselves. We are therefore not taking normal and natural risks in our life in order to live our highest potential. Therefore, we become very dumbed down, we become very restricted and very confined. We're having a lot of anxiety attacks, and we are susceptible then to more control, and therefore we are willing to do what the government asks of us. Now, anyone who's been following this podcast that we started in 2020 to talk to the C-vid narrative will know that the government is not serving your highest interests. You only got to look at history to understand that governments have shown their true colours time and time again, that they are about control. Now, you can go further down the rabbit hole. It's not just about control, it's about harvesting our life force energy. And in particular, we won't touch on this today, but we've got other podcasts about it, harvesting the life force from our children. There's some many and very dark pathways that you can look into, and you need to inform yourself. You need to be aware of what's going on. So let's wake up on a collective level to what the governments are up to, how they are controlled by a cabal regime. You may need to investigate that as well. But why I wanted to talk to Zoe today is that I've lovingly called her for many years the angel of death. And it's a beautiful term because she, as a healer, as a registered nurse, as the different roles that she's in a capacity as a therapist, has helped many people cross over. And she has a beautiful take on what it means to die. So I'll hand it over to Zoe just to talk a little bit about her history, and then we'll go into further what this fear is about, what death truly means, and why it's important that we all face our death, because at that point we're truly liberated and we're truly free. So Zoe, a little bit about your history with helping people cross over.
Yes, thank you, Carrie. Hello everybody again. It's an interesting topic dying and death, because we're led to feel in this form, this physical form, that it's the end. And it is the end of this physical form, very much so. If it wasn't the end of this physical form, can you imagine how many souls, how many people in this form would still be here on this earth plane? It would be so overcrowded that we would destroy ourselves anyway. And is that what's happening? Are we overcrowding our earth with human form, and we're destroying it anyway because we feel that we're way above the natural order? And the natural order is that we pass through this phase, this physical phase, to the next phase. Now, I've said this many times. Energy is not destroyed, it changes form. Science backs me completely on that. In fact, it's one of their great mantras. Energy is not destroyed, it changes form. We are a system of energy. End of story. We have a whole lot of other mechanisms in place, from emotions, from a spiritual understanding, our mental health, and we become attached to this body. We are attached to this body because we've chosen to take form here, now, in this energetic form. All right, my history comes from my birth. I was born all those years ago, 67 years ago, going on 68 years. And I was a child that was given away at birth. So number one, I came through with an understanding somehow that we aren't really attached to our parents, because my parents, my father probably didn't even know I was here or coming, and my mother chose to give me away. And actually it was a blessing in disguise, because it allowed me a full understanding from a very young age that I wasn't really attached to anything or anybody, even though I loved my adopted parents and I loved them dearly, and I was probably more like a child of their own than many children of our own anyway. So I grew up not feeling really a part of their family, and I had my own thinking, and I attached to my own thinking very much, and I had an understanding that was in place from a very young age. I went through school, which I thought honestly, and I've said this before also, was the biggest waste of my time, because it just seemed so pointless. I did learn to read and write, thank goodness, and I did learn basic maths, but the rest of it, I honestly would look at my teachers and wonder why that was all so important. Maybe I was a quick learner, and I learned so quickly that the institution of schools that I went through really didn't serve my highest good. And I came to understand that more as time went by. I think if they'd been teaching me about the wisdom of life, the prophecies of life, the understanding of what my own thinking was about, and why that was so important, I may have paid more attention, but I didn't. Anyway, I got through enough to go nursing, and I went nursing, and I really enjoyed nursing. Nursing was very different back in the early 70s, because it was more hands-on. It wasn't so based in keeping records. And so I felt very aligned to it. But as time went by, I came to understand that it was not about really nursing and healing people, except with the use of drugs. And that bothered me. It bothered me dreadfully, because I always believed that we have a mechanism within ourselves that will self-heal. And we can self-heal if we so choose, to a point, because we can't stop the natural progression which leads us to transitioning or dying to this form and moving to another form. And I really do believe we move to another form. We certainly don't just die. Our consciousness is such that it is universal. Now, there's two types of consciousness, very much so in today's world. There is a consciousness of density, which is being told what to do, what to think, where to go, and how to do it. Or there is a consciousness of self-determination and self-realisation, which takes you down all sorts of pathways of investigation and understanding, and then making a choice of your own direction. Unfortunately, at the moment, with what's happening out there in our world, we are being told more and more what to do, when to do it, how to do it, who to do it with, and who not to do it with. And we are being restricted to the point where our own self-determination is being taken from us in the guise, and I would say in the guise, of our own good. Number one, anxiety levels are rising, suicide rates are rising, domestic violence is rising, all sorts of other social issues are being manifested. Children are not socialising one-on-one or with their own peers, except through an external media source. And I'm not sure that that is healthy. In fact, from my perspective, it is not healthy at all. When we are put into the likes of being locked down and having to stay inside, like they were in those high rises in Victoria, except for, what was it, half an hour a day, they were allowed out for some exercise. They were actually being removed from the natural order of life. Because very often in those high rises, you cannot even open a window. So you are relying on recycled air through air conditioners, and which very often aren't maintained, and the filtration systems of that are invading your whole body with all sorts of bacterias and viruses and goodness knows what. And there was no choice in this.
And also delivered food that wasn't going to give you any light codes, any life force.
Exactly, that's a whole other issue, isn't it?
It certainly is.
That the food that we are ingesting, the more it's processed, the more it's cooked, the more all sorts of things, the less likely our bodily self is able to function in a way that it protects itself.
So it really comes down to the government's actually trying to kill us rather than keep us alive.
It seems that way, very much so.
You look at the chemtrails, you look at the fluoridated water, you look at the genetically modified foods, you look at insecticides, pesticides on our food. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Exactly.
And on.
Now, talking about pesticides, one of the pesticides, no, not pesticides, but they would come into the same realm. I don't know as much about it, but herbicides that are being used, by far and away the greatest use of a thing called glyphosate, which comes under the guise of Roundup, all sorts of other names, generic names, depending on who's marketing it. They know that it is carcinogenic. Now, why isn't it taken off the why is it still available if they know that it's carcinogenic? Our bees are being impacted so heavily that there are programs happening in Europe, and I saw this firsthand in 2018, where a lot of the farmers and groups from the cities were planting flowers and wildflowers all along the roadsides to try and encourage the health of bees, because bees were dying by their millions, and we rely on bees to pollinate. Now, if we kill off all the bees, if the bees are all being killed off because of insecticides that are being used, we then become reliant on genetically modified seeds. And that gives the power of nature away to the power of the nature of human beings. Now, I'll put it in that order. Yeah,
that's right. And they're even growing meat in laboratories and trying to sell this as vegan meat, and almost trying to entice the vegans, who most vegans we know have such a big heart. The reason they are vegan is because they don't wish to harm animals. So they're now tempting the vegans in with this laboratory grown meat, but that is against nature. So it's another way of manipulating our consciousness. The reason, if people are inquiring as we speak, why would the government want to do this to us? Well, as we mentioned before, it's about control. But also too, to theme it into what we're talking about today in regards to death, when we ingest these chemicals, our third eye chakra, which is a living technology within all beings that keeps us connected to pure source consciousness. When our third eye chakra, our pineal gland, pituitary gland, is operating at its optimum, we are able to know that we are from the God source. We are able to receive higher knowing, and we are able to also transmit. So we literally create our reality via the transmission of this sacred technology. Now, everyone has that. The governments or the cabal, we may even go back a step further. The cabal knows this. In order to control us, they have to have us in a state where we are separated from our God source. So they are therefore taking the position of God for us. They are creating these quantum computers, if you like. We're seeing the way we're tracked, traced. Now they're wanting to chip us. They're wanting to, through this, I'm going to call it a Maxine, so its usual name, but you know what I mean, starts with a V. They're wanting to, they've got nanoparticulates that go into the bloodstream. It's almost like a robot, if you like. So it's got this ability, and it pings off the 5/G networks that actually can control you. They can control your health, they can control your emotions. It may seem like a sci-fi movie, but it's actually happening. It's actually already been implemented. There are facial recognition cameras. The reason the cabal wants to control us is because if you look at their handbook, they've said this openly. They see humans as cattle. Now, we are also treating cattle in a very degrading way, and we need to wake up to ourselves as humans and what we're doing to animals, because it's not on. We don't have the right to have dominion over anyone. Same as the cabal does not have the right to have dominion over us. But they see us as cattle. They need our consent in order to keep rolling out their programs. And the stupidity, and I say that with love because we're all in that same boat, the stupidity of the humans is that we give them our consent. Now, don't take offense when I say the stupidity, because we have been dumbed down through their regimes. But this is why we're having these sort of conscious conversations, so we can all awaken collectively. We're all in the same boat, but we can all do this arm in arm, hand in hand, and we can move forward, and we can simply not consent. And whether people know it or not, just by vibrating out through your voice, I do not consent, will diminish the power of the cabal. Sometimes you don't even have to do more than that. Other people are going to take action in a greater way or keep speaking up in a greater way. But if you're the sort of person that's just not sure what to do, how you can do it, write it out. I do not consent. Write it out what you don't consent to. You're a frequency that adds potency to the collective energy field. Never underestimate your power. You've been told that you're not powerful, yet you are powerful beyond all measure. So this is what's happening. Our third eye has been arrested. We don't have its normal functioning, and therefore we do not know that we are part of God's source. Therefore we look outside of ourselves for someone to be God, whether it's a church leader, whether it's a government leader, whatever it is. You know, we might see God in a teacher. We might see God in any other construct outside of ourselves where we think that that has a greater authority than our own knowing. And at that point, we are easily manipulated, we are easily controlled. And what we're seeing with the current trends is that we're literally being led into slaughter. They're now talking about, well, I'll call them concentration camps. They're calling them something else, but they do use the word camp for quarantining.
The quarantine camps, yeah.
You know, you've only got to look at Germany, where in the Second World War, well, maybe before the Second World War, I need to get my history right, where they decimated the economy. It's happening now. Then they tempted people onto trains in the lure that they would go and get some work, because these people were desperate, you know, to look after their families. But of course, they were taken to concentration camps and annihilated. So, you know, when we talk about our theme today, our fear of death, we should be more fearful, actually, of some of the regimes that are being rolled out in plain sight than to be worried about a strain of flu, which is now proven to be. And Zoe, I'll let you talk about what that strain of flu is, and you've got a lot of medical knowledge around what's happening with the old flu versus this new flu and what it's about.
Yeah, it's really interesting that this year, particularly in Australia, which I've come to understand, that the flu season did not happen. Usually each year there are thousands of deaths attributed to the flu, to influenza, but that hasn't happened this year. Now, is it because this flu, this coronavirus that is in existence now, has it annihilated the normal flu? And if this form of the flu can spread the way that it has spread, why hasn't the normal flu spread the way that it normally spreads? We do know that there are a lot of false positive tests that come back with this COVID testing that is being rolled out. Is it that every other year there's hundreds of thousands of people that get influenza and survive anyway? Those that are compromised with their health die in normal years, which we know. Now, I've actually had a look at some of the figures that are coming out to normal years. I don't know about Australia, I haven't gone that far as yet, but in the UK, and it came to my notice that things were really out of control in the UK, that in the UK, that the number of deaths every month average around 50,000 people dying every month, which equates to a large number by the end of 12-month period. Now, they're saying that because of this year, the numbers are much higher. Other numbers much higher that are dying because people have been kept alive with underlying problems for much longer, and so an influenza comes along and takes them out. Are we intervening a lot more by putting them into intensive care units and trying to keep them alive when we know that, and they already have stated that 9 out of 10 people that die with this virus have got an underlying condition? How attached are we to staying alive?
And I would go as far as to say that the current narrative through the mainstream media, it's as if death is a new phenomenon. The amount of fear and doom and gloom that is pumped out, it's like people have got an IV drip in whilst they're watching the news, feeding off this doom, gloom and fear, literally pumping through their bloodstream, as if death is a new phenomenon. And really, everyone, we need to remember that it's not a new phenomenon. It's a natural order. We're going to get into this soon, but how beautiful death actually is, because we must talk about that. But we've got to take our power back from this fear that is being pumped out around death.
One of the things that I find the most tragic that has occurred are in our nursing homes, where people have gone because usually they have an underlying condition, they can no longer care for themselves, and they are cut off completely in the guise of saving their lives. My own parents were in care. I understand what that meant. But please, more than any other thing, and so many of those elderly people have said they would prefer to see visitors and their families than to protect them from a natural order of dying because a flu has come through. Whether this influenza, we'll call it influenza, whether this coronavirus is man-made or otherwise, it's still a part of the natural order. We humans are a part of the natural order. So if it has been man-made, does it matter? Come on, everybody. We can't just lock down society because of fear.
When you hear that soldiers would never leave their buddy on the battlefield if they're injured, they would go back and risk their own lives to go and get their buddy, carry them on their shoulder, at their own risk, at their own expense, because they would never, ever, ever let anyone die alone. And we are, I honestly don't even have any words. We are allowing the government to tell us that we can't be there with loved ones as they're crossing over. We have crossed the line.
Yeah.
We have moved into a territory that is horrific. And the fact that, and the governments are doing what the governments do, and the cabal is doing what the cabal does. But our conversations are for those that are sitting on the fence and not sure, and maybe just need to kind of fall back off the fence and know that you'll be okay. Let us assure you, when you stand in your power and when you say no more to this tyranny, then things will change. We cannot allow our loved ones to die alone. We have sold our soul literally down the river if we continue to allow this to happen. And when we have sold our soul, we are then infiltrated by all the dark forces. We are so much better than that. Human beings actually are known as galactic royalty for those who are into such things. They're known as the ones who have the golden ticket in order to ascend. But we have to do the work. It's not going to fall in our lap, this enlightenment, this ascension. We have to do the work. And we have created this ultimate opponent. And it is our duty to our own soul and to the souls of those we love to stand up to this tyranny and say, I will not let my loved one die alone. I will be that soldier on the battlefield that will risk everything to go back and carry them on my shoulder out of there so that they can have a peaceful death with those who love them. We will stand up now.
And the interesting thing is, and this leads us on to not just the reasons why this is all happening, and that's another subject again, because it is about manipulation of the masses in the name of life. Now, let me take that a step further. A part of life is death. If we look at nature, and nature is our greatest guide, the natural world. When a plant comes to full blossom and then it dies, it leaves behind petals and stamen and pollen and all sorts of things that are left, sometimes seeds that can regenerate. But the rest of it goes into the soil. That is still a part of the whole. Now, it may not be in its beautiful form that we have witnessed. However, If we watch the seed fall into the earth, one of the great miracles that we live with daily, that nobody really even stops to witness, is the breaking forth of that seed out of its pod as it breaks through that pod and grows and comes forward out of the earth and becomes the new plant. And so life goes on. Now we too, if we've had children, we can watch our children grow, and that is our legacy in this form, all right? If we put out energy in another form to whoever we're speaking to, exactly here, the energy that I'm giving to you through what I'm saying, the energy that I give to, say, the work we do in Cambodia, to help the children become educated so that they have a choice and they are not open to being human trafficked, because a lot of those children in Cambodia were taken or sold into sex slavery. What I do there, the energy I give there, that is my legacy. Not just through my children, that's only a very, very small part of it, because their souls, the part of their consciousness that they have developed and grown with, comes to impart the knowledge and the energy that they have to give out. That adds to the conscious whole of the universal consciousness that we live with every day. Now, if we don't die, as I said before, we overpopulate this earth. We overpopulate it to the point where we destroy it completely. However, even if we go that far, nature has a great way of transposing and transforming and growing again and starting again. However, do we start then with the level of consciousness that we were at when we destroyed it? Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
And that sums it up beautifully, because it is all about consciousness. And just as I'm listening to you, Mum, and I feel like it's downloaded in me at a greater level, that what we're spreading through, say, the work that you do with the children in Cambodia, or a podcast like we're doing now, any of the way that we leave our seeds of wisdom, that is life force that continues to grow and grow and grow. So from another perspective, again, we're shown there is no death. What we add to the collective is energy. It will always regenerate itself. It will always flourish. It can never die. Our ego attachment, and for those who are our yoga students listening to this, or our Healers Course students listening to this, we talk a lot about ego in our courses, because our ego attachment to this form is really what gets us into a lot of trouble. Again, and I'm not making excuses, but I will forgive us all to some degree that this third eye chakra has been so damaged and so locked down over this tyranny from the cabal. When we know we are that God source, we're not attached to this form, because we're all that ever has been, all that ever will be, and all that is now. We cannot die. As Mum said earlier, energy cannot be destroyed. So when we remove the ego, we are, of course, going to look after this sacred vessel that we have been provided with by pure goddess consciousness. We're going to actually look after it a lot more than probably what we're doing when we know that, because we know this is the temple in which our soul is able to express itself. And we feel no separateness from the whole. Therefore, when we feel no separateness, when we know we're equal within that, we know that we are pure source energy, we allow ourselves to shine. And this is why actually we look after this vessel even more, because we want to make sure that we uphold the highest integrity whilst we're having this perfect earthly existence, to share our light for all our brothers and sisters. Why would we dumb down any part of our consciousness, and we know that the body expresses that consciousness to a certain degree, we are going to not actually choose death, even though we accept death, and this is the paradox. We're going to choose life, knowing that death will happen when it's right for the completion of this contract that the soul is having in this particular form. But we are not attached to it. And it does sound like a paradox, but that's really where consciousness exists, at the midpoint between choosing life but accepting death.
Yeah, one of the things that happen on the journey through life and towards our dying in this form is that we have a mechanism within us which we call the survival mechanism. So it's almost like a war that goes on between this higher understanding and this bodily form. In fact, what's happening out there on our earth plane is exactly that. Who is going to take precedence? Who is going to step up or step down? So we can call it the cabal, we can call it evil if we want to. We can call it whatever we want. But it is about survival, not about everybody's survival very often, because that survival mechanism within us will destroy so we can survive. And that is exactly what is happening out there on this earth plane.
Well, I mean, look at the latest statistics about what's happening in Norway, where X amount of people in aged care facilities were given the vaccine that starts with a V, and depending on whether you follow the mainstream media narrative or you do your own research, but we're talking a lot of people, at least 30 odd people from what I've seen, and probably more. But we're told that that's okay. That's okay because, yes, the vaccine's going to take out a certain number of the elderly because they've got, comorbidity and all of these sorts of things. Yet that was the exact argument they used to save grandma back when they started the C-vid narrative about why we all need to close our businesses down and stay at home and mask ourselves and
protect our elderly.
And so they can't have it both ways. And this is where I get exasperated.
Yeah.
Because those people who are not seeing through this idiotic narrative that constantly compromises itself from one day to the next, where is the critical thinking? Where is the discernment? You may not believe us about the cabal and about the evil on the planet and about the children's life force being harvested and our life force being harvested and us being tracked and traced. I do. I'm just going to declare that now. But you may not, and that's fine. You have your right to believe what you want. But at least let's all be discerning that the current narrative that's being fed from the health ministers and the media and our governments just truly make no sense at all.
It's really interesting because if you start looking further, and this is through mainstream, the mainstream narrative, that there's a thing called blockchain. And I've only come across this recently. I don't understand it fully, but it is a way of marketing your business. So it's a form of networking, in other words, and it tracks and traces everything you do, you spend your money on, even down to almost what you're thinking. Now, attached to that, and this is just what I've read very recently, attached to that is genetic technology. Now, genetic technology combined with this blockchain where we can track every single thing that a person does in the guise of marketing is manipulative. Whether it's just for marketing or whether it is for other means. Do we really want to be a part of that? I'm sorry, I don't. If you are on Facebook, you know that if you've looked up something on the internet, the next thing that happens within almost a nanosecond is that you've got advertisements about what you might have been looking at.
And what you've spoken about too, because, you know, it's been proven now that the devices listen to your conversations as well. And some people say, well, I've got nothing to hide, so, you know, my privacy, it's fine. I mean, I laugh at that, but let's just entertain that narrative for a second. How far then does it go that they are able to peer into your own life? We've seen through the NSA, there's Snowden came out, he's in jail now, but he was brave enough to leak the fact that not only are they listening, but they can watch you. They can watch you having sex with your partner. They can watch your children getting undressed. And this is where it becomes very scary, because if you have gone down the rabbit hole of the pedophilia, then you don't want anyone looking at your children. You know, this is of grave concern. And, you know, I'm almost at alarm point. It's like, wake up, everyone. Yeah. On the flip side, because I'm on a consciousness journey, and, you know, Mum and I have many conversations about this, we accept where the mass population needs to go. If we need to destroy the planet again, if we need to destroy ourselves again, it's happened before in Atlantean times, it may happen again, but we are at a crescendo point, we're at a pinnacle point. This is why we're having these conscious conversations, that, you know, maybe more people can lend their plasma, lend their light from their third eye to a new narrative, to a new way through, because we've also got the opportunity of a paradise timeline, of a golden age. Yeah. So what are we going to choose? And we're at that point. Now, really importantly, Mum, I've got a great question for you. Well, I've got a few great questions for you. Why do people fear death? You've touched on it a little bit.
We, as I said before, we have a mechanism within us, and that's how we got onto the manipulation and in the survival mode. We have a mechanism within us to assist us to survive in this form. All right, now we've chosen that. We may not have chosen it consciously, so we think, but we have chosen it because we know that this form allows us the freedom of thinking if we also choose that. And that's the important thing, if we choose it. Because everything that we're talking about here is a matter of choice. If we don't have an exponential growth of those that choose not to be party to what is being rolled out, then we go down that pathway as our earth, and it is one of destruction, let me tell you. There's no two ways about that. It will destroy itself. We only have to look back through history and the fossil records to know that when you get this exponential growth and this changing our atmosphere in whatever way we do, it actually implodes, it destroys itself, and it starts again. Even if we don't look at what happened with humans, we only have to look at what happened with the dinosaurs, and look at the fossil records. We had them here in Australia. We're talking from Australia, but that's throughout the world. All right, so this mechanism within us is one of survival. We have a physiological, that's our bodily reaction to what is happening. If this part of us, our brain, our mental capacity, perceives at any level that we are threatened, we have this reaction. All right, our hearts beat faster, you touched on it before, our adrenaline pumps, the cortisol levels go up, everything about us is ready for fright or flight. Now, fright is just shut down and sit in a corner until the threat passes. Flight is to run the adrenaline out of our body.
And it's the sympathetic nervous system. That's what they're playing on, or targeting us with all the time. But it's important that people know that we have a parasympathetic nervous system, and we could describe that, you know, very loosely as the rest and digest state. So when you're in a hyper-vigilant, fear-based state, sympathetic nervous system, that'll actually kill you anyway. You've only got to look at science. to know that that'll kill you anyway.
But
so
no,
parasympathetic nervous system is what we want. So breath. In yoga, we always do shavasana. It means corpse pose. It's actually training you to approach death from a peaceful place, where death is like a meditation you simply don't come out of. It's always in the esoteric teachings. It's there for you. It's available for you to do the
it is
practice.
available to understand the rituals that align to transitioning into what we call death.
And dare I say it, even be excited about death. And well, let's get onto that soon.
Now, it's a really interesting thing that there was a, I don't know what you call them, a meme, is it?
Yeah.
But anyway, it was a little thing, and it was these twins talking in the womb. And one said to the other, so do you believe in life after death, after birth? And the other one said, oh no, I'm comfortable here. I couldn't go there. It's the same thing. It's a transition.
Yeah.
It's a natural order. It's what happens. Now, I've been with, I'll go back a bit, because when you said even science knows, even our own native peoples knew that fear drives you towards death. Now, if you know anything about our First Peoples here in Australia, there was a thing called pointing the bone. And when the bone was pointed, there was such a level of belief and fear that came with that the person that the bone had been pointed at died. All right? You can almost track your own death in your meditative state if you take the time just to sit quietly with your own thoughts and watch the passing parade. And then suddenly you drop into a knowledge that comes from, as Carrie called it, the third eye, from the pineal and the pituitary. It is from source, where you know that the contract that you actually signed before you came here, because we believe that you actually did it consciously to come to this plane, that you know when that time will be. And anything before that time or after that time can, if you allow it, put you into a state of fear. In fact, it will drive you towards that time possibly sooner. Or you just live in a state of fear.
Which is not living, you know.
No, because
And this
because
is the paradox of
you're frightened
holding
of
on,
every shadow, every little pain, every little thing, every little breath, everything. You're just in this state like that.
State of tension. You're holding on to the riverbed. You know, this is your analogy, Mum.
Yeah.
You're holding on to the riverbed instead of just letting the current take you. Therefore, you're choosing to stay alive in a state of fear. Therefore, you're not actually living. And that's how they have control. But this is our own web of deceit that we need to break through. This is our own entrapment that we need to break through. No one can do it for you. You must, and you can see it as an energy thing right now. Close your eyes. See the trappings around you. See how you're locked in with chains, and break free of the shackles. Just break free and live your life. Live your life on your terms. You're a sovereign being. You're God's source. You can't be anything else. So live your life on your own terms.
Now, dying is a transition. Now, I've been with a lot of people that have died. I have sat with them, and I have become aware, and almost from day one, I became aware that it was not the end of that personality. It was not the end of that soul. It was not the end of their consciousness. It was a transition to something that I cannot put words to, per se. Because each soul, spirit, whatever you want to call it, stays with this body, this bodily form, for a certain amount of time. Now, that amount of time seemed to me, as time went by and I observed more and more people that did die, it seemed to me that that consciousness was attached to this body for the length of time that it took for the soul to realize, or the level of consciousness that was attached to that body to realize that it was actually free. That it was actually free from being attached to that. That it was actually free to soar to the greatest heights or the deepest depths, to know everything.
Beautiful.
And the thing is that even in this form, we can know everything if we stop long enough, if we meditate, if we find space to go into our own understanding, because I do believe we know it all anyway. Now, psychology attaches to some of this, because I think it's called the 100 Monkeys syndrome, isn't it?
Yes.
So on this island, these monkeys were opening this coconut a particular way using a stone, and almost simultaneously it was observed that the monkeys on this island started doing the same thing. Now, I think it was Jung that called it universal consciousness. So there is a consciousness that is available to us that we don't fully understand. But if we are not at a point of it in our own consciousness, in our own bodily self, we cannot attune to it. And it is a frequency. All right? It is an absolute frequency. This is where a lot of sound medicine, for want of a better word, sound healing comes from. Because when you are in a certain frequency, this actually opens up and your knowledge is expanded. Where does new understanding come from if it doesn't come from there?
Exactly. And it can heal anything. Sound healing is really the way of the future.
It is.
It's so potent. So because I know we're coming to time, let's talk about, because I think this leads in perfectly to my next question, what happens when we cross over? Because for me, it is about frequency, vibration, colour, harmonics, all of these sorts of things. Some people perceive it like as a geometric coding that we move back into. Often when you meditate, people understand what I mean. When you meditate and you look inwards and upwards into the third eye, you often see geometric patterns. It's a way of understanding who we are in an energy sense. Now, I know, again, we've been cut off from that, but how would you describe what happens when we cross over?
All right, well,
And why is it so much fun?
What I observed firsthand, and I've had experiences with people that I've been very close to, I'll start with children. Now, I've observed children that have died, as young as sort of 18 months, 2 years old and younger. From going into a space when that transition is happening for them, I believe that they have chosen at some level of their consciousness to come here to teach us, to show us the way. Because I've observed them as they've been going through what we call life here, transitioning towards passing over to the other side. And their level of trust and their level of security within what's happening to them is profound. Let's watch the children that have not been conditioned to feel fear. Because most of fear that comes in our life comes from our conditioning. Number one. All right.
But I guess too, we also therefore need to address the fear of the grief of those who would be left behind. So they often hold people to this earth plane because of their own fear of the grief, the loss. That's another podcast, but that's something that needs to be addressed as well.
Look, grief will come anyway. You can be grieving while somebody's alive, believe me. When you start to see the decline of your loved ones, the grief wells. Grief is an outpouring of your love. And if you look at it like that, you may start to see it in another way.
That's beautiful.
because you will only grieve to the level of your love and then your attachment. All right. Having them close to you does not allow the love to expand, because the love expands more. The more you understand, the more your love expands and your consciousness grows. So with older people, when they were dying, and I did work in aged care and I understand more about people that were dying towards the end of their life. Now, some of them died much younger than what I am, and yet they were elderly because they had lived in a state of fear and they hadn't actually moved out of being contained in what they thought life should be. And that's a whole other thing as self, because sometimes what we think it should be is not what is. And so we lock ourselves down more and more and more until our bodies become diseased. But that's okay too. That's a transition in this consciousness in this lifetime. We have many lifetimes to learn these lessons. And maybe we can't learn them until we allow ourselves to have gone through all those things to come to this level of consciousness. We're at a point where the consciousness of change and breaking down the past is very much beginning to manifest itself. Now, all of you that were involved in the 21st of the 12th to 2020 understand what I'm talking about. The change will be exponential. It is happening. It will continue to happen. It may not happen as quickly as you think you want it to be, but that is also teaching you something about patience and about the journey of what life is, because time is nothing.
Yes, and from a galactic perspective, and I wrote this the other day, that the one galactic cycle of say 26,000 odd years is really just an in-breath and an out-breath to the monad, to the highest goddess source energy. So we're in a timeless realm, and yes, we must drop into what is.
And I suppose because time is a human construct.
Exactly.
It's
a cabal construct.
We have constructed time around us. The beginning, the end, night, day, all that is just the natural flow. But we have manipulated it to be what we think it should be.
Yes.
And that's the operative.
Yes.
We think
and also
it should be.
And I agree with that wholeheartedly. But also too, I know people are using the term trust the plan as to what's going on in the US, because whether we like it or not, what's happening in the US with the political situation does affect the rest of the world. But you need to hold both spaces. You can trust the plan, and when I say trust the plan, not just the political plan, but God's plan. But also you are the plan. You're both. You're part of it. You are the narrative that drives the current experience. So to just simply sit back and expect someone else to have the remote control is giving up your sovereignty yet again. Pick up the remote control. If you don't like the game, change it. Do something about it. You are the narrative. You are the plan. We are driving this forward through our mass collective consciousness. And let me remind you, anyone who holds light frequency in their coding automatically has more sway and more power within the collective energy field. Now, you can look at books like David Hawkins' Power versus Force if you want a little bit more science around this. But in a nutshell, one enlightened person counterbalances the negative frequency of 70 million others. This is a phenomenal fact. It's worth investigating. So know that every time you choose love, you choose the best for all beings, you choose sovereignty and freedom, and to have our human rights supported, then you are automatically adding more light, and your light has more potency compared to someone with a negative intention. Remember that, everyone. Remember that. Use your power.
I think in a nutshell, you've just said it, Carrie. It doesn't matter who the players are, right? We have the side of fear and we have the side of love. Now you choose. because one is very driven by fear.
And don't be programmed to think that love is not visiting your grandma as she passes away in the old person's home, because that's what the mainstream media, who's controlled by 6 parent corporations only, don't think that's love. Don't kid yourself.
No,
Stop
that's not
buying the
love.
program.
Love is
Unhook
nurture.
from the matrix.
Love is nurture, love is caring, love is being there.
And don't think
That's
that
what
wearing
love
a
is.
face nappy, breathing in particulates that are going to damage your lungs is love. That is not love. You are being controlled and you are being programmed by dark masters. That's not love.
Yeah, manipulated, completely manipulated. Now, when it comes to the actual transitioning of what death is, and I talked about the soul or the spirit or the level of consciousness that is attached to this body, will take whatever time it needs to program itself to understand that it's no longer attached to this body and to be freed from it. Now you can see this time and time again if you've worked with people that died. The transition changes for each person that died. Some people it's immediate. Now I was fortunate enough to be with both my mum and my dad as they died, as I was with many other people. But because I was so, these were my adopted parents, because I was so close to them and I had this great love for them, there was no other word for it, just this great love and care and nurture for them. When my mum was dying and I was sleeping in the room with her for 3 nights as she was dying, she woke me out of a sleep by tapping me on the shoulder. Now I know that sounds weird, but anyway, that's what happened. And I went and sat next to her body, and I said, "Mum, is it time?" And she said yes. Anyway, she went, and her breathing, you know, I don't know if you've been with people that are dying, but their breathing changes very much. It's called, we call it chain Stokesing. So the breathing stops and then it starts again. Anyway, she went, and then she looked back and she came back and she said, "I can't leave you." And I said, "Yes, you can, Mum, it's okay. It's time to go." Anyway, look, I don't know how long, but within a few minutes, she said, "I have to go now." And I said, "Yes." And I looked up into my knowing place. And there were 3 women there. And one of them was my grandmother, whom I recognised. One of them was my mum's best friend, whom I recognised. And the 3rd woman, I did not know. I had no idea who that was. And Mum turned and waved and said goodbye, and she went with these 3 women. And I was left. Well, of course, I just burst into tears. That was my grief, my pain, I'm not going to see my mum again. She was with her friends, and that 3rd woman was a friend of hers that I had not even met, and yet I knew who she was. And Mum was fine. Mum was free. Mum was away from this body that had let her down, or that she'd allowed to be let down for 9 years because she had dementia. Because she couldn't walk away from what she thought she should do. And she couldn't stand up to things that she really wanted to stand up to. And that was fine, that was her journey. But at that moment of dying, I knew that she was okay. She was actually free. She was free from fear. She was within a place of love, of deep love, of people that loved her. Now, they weren't people per se. They were the consciousness of those people, even though they came in that form. They were the universal consciousness of those entities that came and took her on the journey of transition to the other side. And she was fine. I didn't ring the nurses. I was there in the room with Mum, and I stayed there and I combed her hair and I prepared her as much as I could. I took one of the roses that had been sent to her and I crossed her hands and put the rose there. They were my little rituals of saying goodbye to my mum.
As we're all in tears here.
And she, honestly, she is fun. And she still visits, she still lives with me in my home and visits me here, there and everywhere. She's still there.
She's here right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She completely understands. She always did understand at one level, my mother. She had this great wisdom that she couldn't live in the form that she took in her lifetime. But she did impart so much knowledge. And one of the great legacies that I hope that I then can pass to, not just to my children, but to those around me, she could see every side of an argument. She could put herself into everybody else and see what was motivating them and why they were motivated the way they were. It was the greatest insight. It wasn't one of war, it was one of understanding, and it was where peace came from. And I understood that, even though she couldn't live it all the time. Nor can I, for goodness sakes. We're on a journey. Yeah. We're on a journey of awakening and consciousness. All right, so that was Mum's story. I'd stayed with my mum and I'd seen her look every single day for the last 3 years of her life, because there were a lot of things. My mum had been abused when she was a child, and I feared for her because she lived in a state of fear of what could happen to her when she was so vulnerable. And so I became her protector, all right? And that was my story with her. It was a soul contract I had with her to protect her, to be her mother, in other words, and to protect her. All right, my dad was another kettle of fish. My dad was the great survivor. You know, he had been through World War II. He survived at almost any cost, and he was about eating well and doing the right thing and staying fit and doing everything which was about survival. He learnt what survival was. He learnt from a very young age, because his mother had mental illness. She'd been put into an institution, and he had to learn what survival meant because of great grief that he lived with from a very young age. So, and then World War II, so he saw many of his friends and comrades die during that war, and he survived it. And he was one of the most positive, well-meaning men I think I've ever come across. In fact, even towards the end of his life, one of his fellow army men came to me and said, "You know, your father is the only man that I have ever experienced. Nobody has ever said a bad word about him." Now, that was his legacy. So he was a very fair man, he was a very upstanding man, but he was very attached to survival in this form.
Yes, and he actually said towards the end that he knew the Grim Reaper was lurking, but he was even going to defy the Grim Reaper. So we're talking survival plus.
Yes, he knew, his words were, he knew death was after him, but he was going to beat it. Yeah, good old Dad. Good luck with that one, man. But anyway, I had a change of circumstance. I came to live on this island where I live now. I don't live with Carrie, but we live on Magnetic Island. And Dad was still in care. I didn't have the same level of soul attachment to him, even though I admired him and loved him. And when I said, "Dad, I have to go or I'm going to go under," he said, "Yes, you can't wait here for me to die." He was about survival, mine as well as his own. It wasn't just about him. So off I came here, but I went back 3 times in 2 months, and I was there when he transitioned, when he died. And I was very fortunate that I was there, that I got there. And anyway, he died. I didn't get to say much to him except talking, where I know one of the last things to go before you die is your hearing, and I could talk to him, and I still talk to him. But when he died, there was just this absolute peacefulness came across his face. And I remember saying to him, literally saying to him, you see, Dad, death's not that bad, is it? And with that, all these men, hundreds of them came to take him to the other side. And they were all the men that he had watched die during the war. And his grandfather was there, who he had been very close to. And it was actually quite overwhelming, the number of people that came to help him transition to the other side. But I knew, and I've known for so long, with the people that I've been with, when they're dying, there's a transition that happens where they go into this absolute peaceful state, and when that last breath leaves, there is this, and I've been lucky to experience with both my parents, this great joy, this great joyous reunion that has happened. Now from there on, I don't really know. I don't have a full memory except for floating. Now that's my memory of when I've transitioned out of past lives, is this experience of floating in a place of absolute harmony, peace and joy that you don't really want to leave. But of course, with consciousness, that's to where it is at the moment on this earthly plane, we still undertake to come here to assist the consciousness movement. Now I say that because I believe, and I've known for many, many long years, that I was not of this of this earthly consciousness, that there was a part of me that, and we call it star seeds, I came from another realm to come here, particularly in this lifetime.
And I think it's a good place to finish up, and we do have other podcasts, and we'll keep doing these chats, and maybe you and I can do a starseed chat next time. But a great place to wrap up, because many of you in particular who follow my health and are listening to these conversations, you are the same as us. You know that you are a starseed. You know that you have a very particular mission that you've come to Earth at this precise time for. And we just want to thank you so much, because we know whether you're, very verbal about what's happening, or whether you're just, and I shouldn't say just, but whether you're holding the space through meditation, through visualization, or a myriad of other ways that people are doing and fulfilling their starseed mission. We absolutely want to thank you. Because, Mum, as we spoke about in the last podcast, is starseed Palladian. I'm starseed Andromedan. You'll hear Chris, he'll say starseed Orion. I'm thinking of some of our other teachers. I'm not gonna say where they're from, but they've told me where they're from. Remember, you knew this as a child, so I don't think there's anything wrong with you. Just allow yourself to go into that magic and that mysticism. You knew it as a child. We know these things up until about age 7 before we get heavily programmed. So just go back to that place within you, and just know that you do have a very specific purpose here. Keep shining your light. What's happening with the amount of photonic light that's coming in on the planet, particularly since the 21st of December that Mum spoke about, is that you're receiving a lot more galactic information, meaning your star family are talking to you more and more and more. And this is why you must absolutely know there's nothing wrong with you. You're not crazy. Go with the imaginative process. act upon what you've been told to do. It's all going to be okay. Just to finish up with Granddad, we all saw him, and not just me, Mum saw him, and many others at his funeral saw him waving gleefully at us all as his coffin was sort of retracted within the church. And I wasn't necessarily going to say anything because I've got a very strong third eye. I can see between the worlds. But then Mum said she saw it, and other people came and told Mum that they saw it too. People who don't normally see between the worlds. So I think it's a nice way to finish. Hi, Granddad. Just to remember that death is beautiful. It's so beautiful. Let's not be afraid of death, but certainly let's choose life while we're here, and let's live our best life free from tyranny. Thank you, Mum. We're all sovereign.
Absolutely free from being manipulated. One of the best ways you can do that is to go within, meditate, and find your own level of self-love. Go out into nature, particularly at night if you can, and look at the infinity